All right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. We are on our third episode. Yes, you are watching People Manager Magazine Presents, and I'm Boris Opin, and I'm your editor-in-chief. And with me is, of course, our former past president for PMAP and from Manila Bulletin. And I just called him a while ago, the video kicking, Mr. Barbie Atienza.
All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Boris. Video kicking talaga. Ang ganda ng title ko ngayon. But time flies when you're having a great time. We're now on episode number 3 of the People Manager magazine at bilis ng panahon. And just last week, we were talking about something that's very interesting, very relevant to all. And that's what we aim to do, no? The contents of the Manager magazine, as well as People Manager magazine presents, would always be very timely, very relevant to everybody. Last week, Boris, pinag-usapan natin mental health. And we had two guests, si Shaina Kua and Professor Laarni Tolentino, who talked to us about share their insights. And hopefully, well, our friends and our colleagues from the People Management Association of the Philippines, as well as others who are tuned in to us, picked up nuggets of wisdom or knowledge and awareness about mental health from last week's episode. Di ba, Boris?
Yes, totoo yan. I agree so much. Actually, when I reviewed back the last episode, Sir Barbie, alam niyo, ang taas ng viewership natin. We have
Talaga?
almost 3,000 people who viewed it. And I know the engagement was high, the sharing was high. So mental health is actually a relevant topic for this month. Another relevant topic is education. Di ba? Kasi as you know,
Oo,
kakasimula lang
siyempre.
ng classes. Nataranta yata ang there's yata a particular week, ang balita lang is how did teachers cope up, how did students cope up, and like what you said, Karina, we do promise to deliver relevant topics, and we want to talk about education
Talaga.
today.
Oh, very challenging yan, Boris, kasi talagang, well, the Department of Education, through the leadership of Secretary Briones, has really been struggling during the past weeks. Pero you'll have to take your hat off to her persistence and determination to get the school year started despite the glitches and everything. Syempre, madaming adjustment na required dyan, no? Tayo rin, may adjustment. Gaya ngayon, hindi ko nakikita sarili natin sa screen. Hindi ko alam kung, is it just me? Can you see yourself, Boris?
I can't. I'm just looking at the webcam right now. I'm imagining
Oo
you
nga
as
eh.
I listen to your uh, well-toned baritone voice.
Well, well, some people say, I'm a better company like that. Pakinggan na lang, huwag nang tingnan.
Oh, so you're very
Pero wala
charming
nga
on the
eh.
screen.
So I don't know. I don't know if our technical team are doing some adjustments about this. Also, I'm trying to monitor us from the. We're live on Facebook on the Facebook page of the People Management Association of the Philippines. Just look for that, guys. Yeah, a lot of you, most of you, if not all of you, are watching us live on Facebook, or you can also watch us on the YouTube account of the People Management Association of the Philippines. Ano yata, PMAP 1956, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken, ang hanapin. Both on YouTube as well as Facebook. And I totally deny that that's the year of my birth. Pretty
Hindi,
close,
hindi.
but not quite.
No one can
Hey,
ever guess your age, Sir Barbie. Napaka-youthful at jolly nyo kasi. Everybody
talaga
would probably
naman.
think contemporaries lang tayo.
Sige. Papagrab ako sa iyo. Bigay mo yung address mo, ha?
Next ko na,
Hindi, pero
next ko na.
seriously, I don't know, our directors out there, wala ba talaga tayong visual or hindi lang namin nakikita ni Boris? Talagang wala yata, no?
Wala
Check
yata.
the chat.
Well, yeah.
Wala pa tayong visual. We see you fine. Ang sabi ni technical director natin, si Milton. Is
Yeah.
anyone else noticing yung sinasabi ni Sir Barbs? Hindi ko
Right
alam.
now,
Ako lang yata.
yeah, mukhang kayo right now, what we did is, what you can do, Sir Barbie, you turn on your Facebook page para makita niyo po yung ano, makita niyo yung live broadcast. And our topic for today is really interesting. And okay na po, Sir Barbie, are you ano?
No, I can't see myself, but that if you see me, you see yourself. I'm fine with that. Let's go ahead.
We'll see. Let's see how that this could work in the next few minutes. Pero ang focus po kasi natin ngayon, di ba, is education. And according to the Department of Education, a lot of students who have been enrolled in the private school, lumipat daw sila sa public school. So it's not just people adjusting to the new modalities of learning. It's the economies of things, di ba? Pag lumipat yung mga estudyante from private to public, baka mawalan na, baka magsarado ibang private schools.
That's what's happening, huh?
Yeah, that's what's happening right now. And of course, not everybody gets to enroll also. I'm an advocate of Save the Children Philippines. Ang sabi nila, a large percentage of the population now chose not to enroll their kids this month. So you understand what's the effect also in what's happening right now.
Correct. Meron talaga. Tapos, syempre, because of that, syempre, yung population ng private schools are going down. Some of them are shutting down. And of course, madami rin mangyayari dito. Like, a consequence yan, displacement of some of our teachers in the private school. And on the other hand, overwhelming naman doon sa mga teachers ng public sector. Talagang they have their hands full. Aside from the fact that they have more students now, they're adjusting to a new modality of learning, no? Learning the technology, they're learning the techniques on how to optimize the use of technology. Medyo mahirap talaga. At ang maganda lang kasi talaga dyan, determinado tayo, hindi tayo sumusuko or hindi tayo sinusukuan ng ating mga authorities sa education sector, sa academe.
I think the biggest question looming with us right now is really how do we make our educational system resilient and sustainable? Diba? Parang considering with all these things are happening to us right now, yun siguro ang gusto kong pag-usapan with our guests mamaya.
Oo. How do we make it tuloy-tuloy? Hindi tayo na, alam mo, dati natin pinag-aaralan yun na unang consideration natin dahil because we're in PMAP, we represent different private entities, and well, not only private, but public entities, organizations, or the industry. And dati, the longest time, we've always been talking about the match-up between, or bridging the gap between industry and academe. But ngayon, mukhang it's more than just that. Even that is asking for right answers. Pero the dilemma that we are in now as far as the resiliency of the educational system is concerned is more than just the industry academe gap, Boris.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to be able to reflect on that, alam ko na kailangan unawain yung sitwasyon ng mga school owners, school administrators, mga principals, teachers, and also the parents and students.
Yeah, kasama lahat. Oh. Well, the opportunities are limitless on the other hand. Kaya ngayon nga, today, our third episode of the People Manager Magazine presents online TV. Ang ating pong topic ngayon is dubbed as The World is Your Classroom. The world is your classroom. Yung ibang teachers, ang sabi nila, the classroom is my world. Pero optimistically, titignan natin on the other hand, the world can be your classroom, meaning the opportunities are out there, they're unlimited. Marami tayong, we will focus on issues, challenges that are faced by the education sector, but we will also underscore the fact that there are so many opportunities that are there available for us. And to help us in our discussion, Sir Boris is our guest for the afternoon. He is a gentleman who has earned his PhD in Philippine Studies in Anthropology and MA in Political Science, both at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, as well as his BA Political Science and History in coming from the University of the Philippines, hindi naman sa Diliman, doon naman sa Visayas. He is the current president of the Philippine Studies Association and has served in the board of the Anthropological Association of the Philippines or Ugnayang Aghamtao. Yun pala yung anthropology, Aghamtao, the science of man. Tama pala sa PMAP yun, di ba? People management, tama. He is also a faculty member at the Division of Curriculum and Instruction, Educational Foundations, College of Education of the University of the Philippines in Diliman, where he teaches courses in anthropology, sociology of education. He served 5 terms as chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Philippine Center for Civic Education and Democracy. Ditong PCCED is a non-profit organization dedicated to the promotion of active citizenship and civic engagement, which he helped found with colleagues from the University of the Asia and the Pacific. Etong ating panawin ay nakapag-publish na, nakapag-limbag na ng mga articles in scholarly and peer-reviewed journals and has consistently presented academic papers in both local and international conferences. And recently, kaya babatiin na natin siya at magsi-celebrate. Hindi, we will wish him a lot of luck pala, a lot of success in his new role as the 11th Chancellor of the University of the Philippines in the Visayas. Friends, let's welcome to PPMP, our good friend from UP, coming all the way from UP in Iloilo. A round of applause for Dr. Clement Castigador Camposano. Ayan, Dr. Clem.
Magandang hapon. Magandang hapon sa ating tagapanood.
Yan, welcome to the show and salamat sa pagpapaunlak sa aming invitation.
Yes, Dr. Salamat po for giving us time. On behalf of PMAP, we're glad that you're our guest. Dr. Clem, sobra kaming na-impress sa credentials ninyo. Yung binasa kanina ni Sir Barbie, it's a good combination of scholarly and scientific. And I also like your background in anthropology. So I think with all those decades of experience, you're the right person to actually comment on how our education system is evolving right now. What can you say about what's happening right now in our education system?
Sir Boris, sinita ko muna ng isang introductory question kay Dr. Clem. Yung education, alam natin yun eh. Yung anthropology, ang tawag dito eh, agham tao. Pwede bang paliwanag niyo muna, Professor Dr. Clem, ano ba yung anthropology? Ano ba yung agham tao?
Actually, ang anthropology ay napakalawak na field. Ano? Marami yung mga specializations dyan. No? Meron pang forensic anthropology, kung tutuusin. Ano? Meron kang archaeology. Bahagi rin ng anthropology yan. At yung anthropology po na aking kinabibilangan, ito yung tinatawag natin cultural anthropology. And when I was in graduate school, I focused on the anthropology of migration. So I wrote my dissertation on the anthropology of migration. But at the same time, I also had other interests like civic education. So kabit-kabit ho yan eh. No? So eventually, after retiring from the University of Asia and the Pacific, I found my way back to the UP system, and I joined the College of Education, where I presently teach courses in the anthropology and sociology of education. So medyo lumalawak yung aking interest, and it's very challenging, but at the same time, I feel that it's happening at the right time because we're facing all kinds of issues right now. And I'm currently doing a study on teacher agency. No? That's related to how teachers are actually coping with the demands of online learning. Kasi ang madalas natin iniisip yung technology is just an instrument for delivering content. No? We have this very, the traditional view is to look at technology as an instrument. It's a very instrumental view, but at the same time, we feel that technology is, we are convinced, in fact, that technology is more than that. No? Technology structures human interaction. And so, it's not just a simple matter of using existing technologies to deliver pre-existing educational content, But I think that we need to develop approaches. We need to develop the right habits and dispositions that will allow us to maximize uh, these technologies. Sabi nga nung isang favorite na anthropologist, favorite anthropological scholar ko, si Daniel Miller, sabi niya, the things that we make also make us. Okay? And in the age of online learning, in the age of digitally mediated learning, I think we have to spend more time understanding exactly what kind of interaction happens and how is it in fact being reshaped by digital technology.
Maganda yung point na yun, Professor Clema. Yung sinasabi mong time nga. Kasi tama yung, maganda yung insight mo eh. Dahil tama yun, ang traditional and common thinking is technology is a tool. What you're saying is not, it's not. It's an essential part of the whole human system, the whole social system. Pero ang question doon yung time. Kaya kanina, may nabanggit ka na we really should invest time in it and study it. Pero on the other hand, yun nga sinasabi ng mga proponents na nagsasabi na let's skip 1 year of education, sira na natin umpisahan para makapag-prepare tayo. Ganyan din yung argument, yung na-introduce yung K-12, di ba? Pero yun nga, yung time, yung sinasabi nyo, we really need to put in time to study and learn it. Pero sabi ng iba, we don't have that luxury. What can you say about that?
Well, I think the best way to learn is to learn by doing. And I think that I would say that there's no better way to understand technology issues than to actually just do all of these classes and try to see for yourself what works and what doesn't. And that's my view anyway. And you said something about.
So when you say you have to give it time, it doesn't mean you stop and wait.
Yes,
you can go on
definitely.
and proceed with it.
Yes, because it's to me it's difficult to simply assume that we already know what we know and we know what we do not know. I think when you teach an online class like what I'm doing right now, I'm teaching a full load of 12 units and lahat online. You're discovering something new. You realize that, of course, for example, initially I thought that asynchronous learning, where you are just using, for example, Facebook or a learning management system to interact with your students, and that they respond to you in their own time. At first, I thought that this is going to make my life easier because then I don't have to, deliver a lecture at a set time and so on, and I can just respond anytime I feel like it. It's turning out that it's actually more draining because I tend to spend more time engaging my students. No? It's when sabi nga nung isang research participant ko, when being at home and working at home becomes one and the same thing, it's very hard to manage your time. So I think there are all these unanticipated difficulties we're facing that we have to, I think, really try to examine our own practices, and there is really no better way to do it than to reflect on what we're doing now, to be reflective, to be reflexive about what we're doing now, and see how we can make fuller use of technology, and maybe to understand also the pitfalls, because there are many difficulties associated with this.
I want
to hear your reflection. Kasi right now it's happening, it's ongoing. You're not the only one who pivoted to digital learning right now. Ano yung mga current reflections mo? Baka glean tayo ng wisdom for that, and also other educators are listening right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my reflections will be limited to my own experience as a faculty member of the College of Education. I teach undergraduate and graduate courses. So essentially, my reflections would be about my experiences handling those classes. Of course, there's a lot of talk about the inability of students to participate, the digital divide, for example. Some students may not have access, and so on. But those are certainly valid concerns, and I know of students who have difficulty uh, gaining access simply because they don't have regular internet at home, or they rely on prepaid data and so on. Some would, are forced to use very old devices that have very limited capabilities. So those are real issues. But I also discovered that in fact, my students are actually more participative
Really?
in online. I mean, they I'm seeing aspects of them. I'm seeing capabilities that I actually didn't think were there. Mas malalim yun. Actually, mas malalim yung discussion, and uh, they're actually more engaged. With those who participate, they're very much engaged. So I think going back to an earlier point I made, it's we are obviously having a very difficult time now with online learning, but I think there are very important lessons to learn here. We should not squander the opportunity, because I think we will come out of this pandemic wiser, with a greater, clear sense of what our capabilities are, what our opportunities are, also of course where the pitfalls will be. Uh, I mean, this early we can already say that government needs to invest more on infrastructure. We need to
Yeah.
make devices more readily available. We need to tap non-traditional sources of financing, at least for people to access these capabilities. But at the same time, I mean, you can have the infrastructure, you can provide devices and so on, but if your teachers are not attuned to using online technology, okay, if many teachers, and I know there are a lot of teachers who are like this, have not overcome their fear of going online, of relying on digital technology, if they've not uh, unlearned their aversion to computers, no? The internet, then we will have problems. No? So uh, it's a very challenging time, but also very potentially rewarding one as well, I think.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Pero how would you comment yung mga limitations that are beyond their, okay, one is kung talagang merong mindset that contradicts the whole model, the whole moving forward thing. Pero may limitations eh. Infrastructure, as you mentioned, is one. I was just hearing from our very own executive director, Rene Hener. Sabi niya, umuwi siya doon sa farm nila sa Bulacan, and he was observing. I don't know kung meron ding differences to na well, your students are in college, so baka yung younger years, iba naman ang dimension na pinag-usapan. So he found it quite pathetic that in certain areas, as near as Bulacan, I mean, I'm talking about from the perspective of Imperial Manila, malapit lang, Bulacan lang eh. Pero nakita na doon that the students were, it was a situation of the blind leading the blind. In fact, the sheep were more learned than the shepherds. Parang ang hirap. Sabi niyo, how do you bridge this great divide? Yun ang problema eh.
Yeah, that's true. No? I mean, the digital divide is very real, and and I think our forced reliance on digital technology is going to amplify pre-existing inequalities. Okay, many students are definitely going to be advantaged by this because they already have access. They have cable internet at home. They have very nice devices. They have parents who have a lot of
Nice.
time to help
Yeah.
them with schoolwork. They can afford tutorials, etc. And then there are kids who have no devices. They have to rely on printed modules and so on. So this is not this is not an easy situation at all. And I think we should never understate the inequalities that will be worsened by the current pandemic, and by our decision to go into precisely online and to a certain extent blended learning. But well, these things are pre-existing conditions. We've always had a very unequal society, and I think that the situation now ought to force government to really think about how to narrow the gaps at different levels, not only in education but elsewhere. We need to start thinking about many of these problems from a much broader perspective. Actually, madalas, yung iba inisip nila that education is the great equalizer, di ba? That's a very common
Dapat.
view. Pero I don't think that's true. No? In fact, for many people, education is the great barrier, actually. No? Because in many ways, education functions to amplify many of the inequalities that already exist. Okay, and in fact, many problems that relate to educational inequality are actually rooted in social inequality. They're the source of the problem is not in the educational system; it's outside.
Yeah.
So kabit-kabit ito
okay,
no?
From a viewpoint of both an anthropologist as well as an educator.
I like to leverage more on that because I think that is a good insight. Because totoo nga naman, because of the limitation of connectivity and technology heightens the existing inequality that we have in society right now. You did mention several parang probable or proposed solutions. Of course, the government have to step up in so many. They need to really make sure that internet is available no matter where you are, and we have the lowest bandwidth in Southeast Asia, despite the fact that we are charged as much. You did mention about teachers getting over their discomfort with the digital environment and get on with it. What would you say to, what's your observation about parents in this situation? What can we say about them parang getting on board with the perpetual disruption that's happening in our education system?
Well, again, if you look at parents, here you will see exactly the how socioeconomic conditions play a very important role. Some parents can't help their kids. They have to go to work, okay? Assuming that they actually have work. Many middle class parents, of course, because they're working from home, so they can maybe make adjustments and help their kids with assignment and so on. But with many working class parents, that's just not possible. Okay, because they have to work, and even if they have time, they are also not prepared. I mean, they don't have the capability to help out with the kids, to help them with lessons and so on. I think this is one area. This is a very difficult area. But I think we need to have a more granular way of understanding the conditions that Filipino families have to deal with. We certainly cannot assume that all families face the same challenges. We have, certainly we have to stop adopting one size fits all solutions. Clearly, I think we need to focus on solutions that are sensitive to the problems of, let's say, working class parents. Right?
What works?
Yeah, and at the same time, I think since we're talking about the educational system as a whole, I think this is an opportunity to start hammering away at the over-centralization of education in the country. Our educational system is overly centralized. I mean, that has always been the problem since the time of the Americans. Okay, it's even more centralized now. Okay, if you're thinking of DepEd, I mean, it's an institution, it's an agency that has close to 1 million regular employees. Okay, almost 1 million regular employees, and you add to that, employees in the private sector, private educational sector, higher ed, and so on. You have more than 1 million, and while there is some autonomy, at the tertiary level, the basic level, there's very little autonomy. So we have a very centralized system, and a very centralized system is not in the best position to provide nuanced solutions. Okay, the tendency always to go for one size fits all solutions. I think we need to look at that and try to see, for example, how you can decentralize decision making in education so that you have educational leaders who are better able to respond to local conditions. Kasi magkaiba we are a very plural country. No? We're also a very unequal country. So uh, educational leaders will face different problems across regions. And also, you have many opportunities in the local areas that can be mobilized or taken advantage of. Um, in some places, for example, you have alumni organizations who are stepping up to support schools. Okay, you have local governments that have funds to procure gadgets for students. You have you have local governments with very good leadership, with very good local leaders, very visionary local leaders who can, who can really think through many of these problems. So I think we need to, yes, hindi lahat, certainly, no, but where you have those kinds of leaders, I think they should be given the opportunity to participate, no, and that their successes, I think, should be publicized so that other leaders can also see that some of these problems really have solutions. No? We don't just think about them theoretically and based on solutions that are based on certain assumptions. I mean, tried and tested solutions. Okay, so that's how I would look at the situation right now.
Partner, sabi mo
go ahead.
Pero sana lahat ganun.
Pero
Dr. Clem, parang best practices, if we could learn from what other people are doing, baka that can be replicated from
adapted
after another, no, Dr. Clem?
Learn from each other.
Yes. Well, in fact, that is true for many other issues. No? Many other issues in government. You have actually a lot of local government units who are solving their problems in ways that have not been anticipated at the national level. So I'm not saying that everything's okay. I mean, obviously there are areas where government is ineffectual, but there are also areas where government is able to make a difference. So what are we doing with all of these lessons?
May nagagawa.
May nagagawa naman no? So and I'm not at all suggesting that we minimize the problem as it is. Of course not. But certainly we have to understand that there are important successes that can also point the way forward in many areas.
Point very well taken, Boris, kasi talagang situational, iba't iba yung mga iba't iba yung level, iba't iba yung situation, both economic, yung iba nga hindi naman economic, like yung mga parents na ayaw tumulong doon sa mga anak, hindi dahil ayaw nyo tumulong. Kaya lang napapasubo sila pagka tinignan nila yung lesson, hindi ko alam yan pero imbis na sabihin doon sa anak na hindi ko alam yan, oy, bahala ka, ikaw mag-aral dyan, huwag mo akong akaasahan. No? Mga ganun. Pero okay, I will digress a bit from the anthropological standpoint or maybe philosophical standpoint. With all of these differences, with all of these challenges, ano ba talaga ang bottom line objective or what is the underlying principle of providing education? Ano ba talaga ang kailangan nating ma-achieve having a working educational system?
Okay. Well, if you have to be philosophical, we can be philosophical about this. No? I love the classics, and one of the things that I have really absorbed, taken to heart from the classics, is this idea of Aristotle that people are social beings. We are by nature social animals, social creatures, and we develop our capabilities as social creatures. So I think that our education should really not only be aligned with that social nature, it should nurture. It should nurture that social nature. That's the reason why I think at a certain level of generality, we can say that all education should in fact be education in citizenship. I mean,
Citizenship.
You can imagine a very competent engineer who doesn't care about his country, doesn't care about his society, who couldn't care less about what happens to or what implications there will be to when it comes to the things that he's doing, no? Who doesn't see that in fact his work has implications elsewhere. We don't need that kind of engineer. Okay, that kind of engineer is going to be a problem to humanity at some point. So we need people who are in fact not isolated from social life, from the larger society of anonymous others, whether that society is a barangay or a municipality or the nation or even the planet. Okay, because we are, after all, one global community in many ways. There are obvious differences. There's a great deal of inequality between many countries, but we also have many problems that are common, problems that cut across our differences. So we need education that in a sense, as I said, nurture the social dimension, the social nature of people. So that's why I said that all education should in fact be education and citizenship. Yeah. And I don't really mean itong araling panlipunan where you memorize the names of your government officials, you memorize the steps that is followed and are followed when laws are made, etc. I mean that's not real social studies, if you ask me. I'm talking about education that provides people with skills, provide them with high level skills, but at the same time it imbues them with that sense of social responsibility. That in a sense, you don't only learn to be a good engineer, to be a good biologist or molecular biologist. You also learn to situate yourself, not only mentally but also habitually in a community, as a member of a community of anonymous others. And I have to emphasize anonymous. Our tendency is always to work only with people we like, people who are known to us, relatives, friends. We even imagine our national officials as members of families, no? So presidente tatay ang tawag natin, no? Minsan ang mayor tawag mo ama ng syudad, no? That's very problematic as far as I'm concerned, because these are civil servants, and if they're not doing their job, they should be criticized. No? And you can't do the same thing with your father, for example. So to the extent that we keep on imagining our public officials as members of families, if we keep extending the language of the family into the public sphere, I think it shows that we lack the capacity to think of to situate ourselves in this society of anonymous others. We seem to have a difficulty imagining the public. And I think that's it's something that you acquire not by memorizing the Constitution, not by learning the ins and outs of legislation, but by developing habits that always connect private interests, personal interests, and of course the public good and the common good. So these are things you don't. Yeah, these are things that are, to me, these are things that are dispositional. They're not concepts. They're not concepts. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. Yeah, it's like learning to ride a bicycle. You can't read about it. You just have to do it and practice doing it.
And of course, giving emphasis to why you're doing it. Yung importance. So, I was saying, napakaganda nung insight ni Dr. Clem. Boris, di ba? Kasi tayo sa PMAP, sa mga HR managers, yung tinitignan natin, hindi pwedeng capability, skills, knowledge. Kailangan yung character enriched din, di ba? You have this knowledge, but you have to know what is the proper way of using them. Parang ganun yung tinitignan natin sa education, no? Pero yun, how do we deliver it? That's another question. Di ba, Boris?
Yeah, it's not just the skill that matters or the knowledge or intelligence. We always say that EQ plays a big part. Yung social quotient, yung social construct on how we understand it. What I heard from you kanina, Dr. Clem, is parang dalawa yung dynamics niya. One is what we learn should be contextualized, so to speak. It has to be socialized. It has to be something that's relevant to their community. At the same time, it's also understanding that we get to serve everybody regardless of who they are. It doesn't, we're not supposed to be limited by what's familiar, and we're not supposed to be limited by undue compliance on let's say authority figures and like
nakasanayan.
Looking at respect, but it's really more respect in general, which includes tolerance, grace, diversity, and equality.
all that comes to
Yeah,
play. Tama.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
the interesting thing here is this, no? For the most part, I mean, there's an important pedagogical question or pedagogical issue here because I mean, you always ask, how do you teach citizenship? No? I mean, it's not.
Ah,
It is of course a concept, no, but learning it is not really conceptual because most you know, human beings are creatures of habit. Okay? If you make an inventory of the things that you do from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, easily about 90% of it would probably be habitual. Okay, so I think that when you talk about citizenship, a great deal of it, I think, is based on our habits and dispositions. And habits and
mm,
dispositions are not learned in classrooms. Okay, they're not learned in a lecture. You learn by doing. That's the reason why I'm a big advocate of service learning approaches. No, where kids learn, for example, by being involved in communities. No, I'll give you a very simple example. No? I once suggested that I think we were in Naga then, and we were talking to some educators there. He said, he said that, you know what, there's a way to teach citizenship while teaching biology at the same time. Okay, and it can work like this. No? You can ask your students, for example, to do a bit of research, try to look at water quality, look it up in a microscope, and you can have a really good scientific discussion about what you see under a microscope. But then you can move on
mm,
to reflect about why is the water so dirty? Where is it coming
yeah.
from? Okay? Or if you want to teach math, for example, you can ask your students to analyze the contents of garbage cans, do a statistical analysis, and look at it. So you learn the math. But at the same time, you realize that, my God, 90% of this is actually not biodegradable.
Very
Or
relevant.
about 90% of this is really coming not from, the traditional evils, the traditional villains, but coming from ordinary people. So you teach,
Oo.
you teach math, you teach biology, but at the same time, people are able to connect these kinds of lessons to the larger uh, social environment, the issues of the common good. And I think if
Mm,
students learn that way, the lessons actually stick, no? Because they become real life lessons.
oo.
Okay, so
Oo, I can relate eh. Oo. Kasi
Just
nung high school ako,
approach
like,
our
marami akong subjects, tanong ko lagi sa teacher ko, paano ko ba gagamitin sa buhay ko yan? Tuturuan ako ng physics, memorize ka ganito, measure ng ganito, paano ko ba magagamit sa buhay ko yan? Hindi ko nakikita yan. Wala ako ng gana. Di ba? Even
yeah,
the method itself, di ba, is
yeah,
very, very important.
yeah.
Boris?
So kanina so maganda yung sinasabi niyo, no, Dr. Clem. So having the crisis at COVID-19, of course I don't want to sound insensitive in any way.
mm-mm,
Would you consider it as a blessing since it disrupted the way we do things?
mm-hmm.
It in a way it collapsed the four corner classroom and allowed us to look at innovative ways to actually remold the education system.
Well, I won't call it a blessing because people will certainly react. I mean, sinasabi mo lang yan kasi may access ka sa technology. Sinasabi mo lang yan dahil hindi ka nagugutom, ano? Of course, I mean, it's not a blessing per se. It's a challenge. It's a very serious challenge. But what I would like to say is that there are opportunities here for us, people in industry, people in the education, political leaders, community leaders, to ask the hard questions about social inequality. Uh, we keep trafficking in myths about us being all brothers. We are all equal under the law. But the fact is, there are people in this country who are unable to do the most basic things. And oftentimes their concerns are being swept under the rug. They don't have a voice. They don't participate in policy. Nobody cares to listen to them. So to me, it's in a sense, it's a good time to reassess our priorities and to ask ourselves, are we really listening to the concerns of people? I mean, are we are we sensitive enough? Do we really understand the nature of social inequality, for example? Do we really understand, how the relationship of education to social inequality, for instance? Alam mo, isa sa mga pet peeve ko palaging sinasabi ng marami, no? And I don't blame them for saying it, but I always take this up in my classes. People keep talking about education as the solution. No? Palaging ganun, no? Maraming mahirap, education is the solution. Okay? Maraming nabubuntis, education is the solution. Maraming namatay sa baha, education is the solution. My problem with that statement is that you keep saying that education is the solution. What is the problem? I mean, we keep talking about it as a solution, but we don't quite understand what the problem is. Huh? Don't you think that education is also part of the problem? Because I think that we can only begin to imagine how education becomes a solution if we can understand how it becomes part of the problem. How is it, for example, we talk about equalizing access to education, okay? So, okay, no child left behind, everybody come in, everybody welcome, no? Inclusive tayo, no? Okay, but don't you think that in many cases you draw all of these kids from diverse backgrounds, many of them from very poor backgrounds, you draw them into the educational system only for them to fail?
Yeah.
Diba? And have we asked, for example, how basic education in this country is in fact amplifying pre-existing inequalities? Kasi, I would, I'll share this with you. It's an interesting thing that I've learned from my students. So my students are teachers, okay? Many of them are public school teachers. And I always ask them, kayo mga nagtuturo sa public schools, saan nyo makikita, saang section ninyo makikita ang mga estudyante na galing sa mga pamilyang may kaya? Okay. And without exception, they will always say Section 1. Section 1.
Okay.
So are we going to conclude now that yung mga anak na mahihirap ay bobo?
Yeah.
Kasi nandun sila sa mga mababang section. Kasi nandun sa section number 1, mga middle class yun, ano? And guess what? These are the same students who will finish the elementary and who will apply to the good high schools, and they will be the ones who will take the admission test in college. So by the time you're done educating them, after so many decades, okay, you pretty much have reinforced pre-existing inequalities. So, yung mga mahirap, they would have fallen, they have failed, and many of them would have left school already. Many of them would have learned the hard lesson that talagang hindi para sa kanilang kolehiyo, na hindi naman siguro tama na aasa pa sila dahil talagang hindi para sa kanila yon, dahil wala sa kanilang kakayahan. So how is education in fact worsening inequality in this country? Because we keep talking about it as the great equalizer. We keep talking about education as the solution. We haven't quite explored, the possibility it might actually be part of the problem. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think you can spend more wisely. You can if you have only so much resources to spend on education, then I think it's important that you know that you're spending in the right direction. No? Kung hindi naman gano'ng kalaking pera mo, dapat talaga alamin natin kung yung billions ba na ginagastos natin nakakatulong ba talaga, or is it going to actually finance people who can actually afford, people who are already advantaged to begin with, because they're the ones that are benefiting from the system. And of course, there's that larger question, nasa education ba ang problema? O baka naman yung problema na nakita mo sa education is simply a symptom of a problem outside of education. Okay?
As a result, yeah, right.
As a result, no?
Pero
yeah, so
kasi hindi ko na alam kung sistema ng problema doon, dahil sabi mo nga, siguro on a general plane, pwede natin sabihin yun, yung medyo nakaangat sa buhay, nagkakaroon ng undue advantage, built-in advantage, because probably they're more nourished, the parents guide them more, di ba? Pero I've also seen a whole gamut of examples of people coming from poverty and going through the educational system and succeeding, and eventually becoming congressmen and senators and presidents, what have you, di ba? So
yes.
I'm not sure if that's an empirical. There's empirical evidence to support that. But before before we go on with the reaction, with the comments of Dr. Clem, shout out lang, Boris, sa ating mga kasama ngayon dito sa Facebook. Si Mayeto Buenacosa, good afternoon. And our friend Pickett from Australia is listening, tuned in here. He's enjoying the discussion and the smiles. Good, ano daw. He welcomes the smiles. Rico Villanueva Recio is also with us. May Digueño Gelida, Carla Pelayo Lozano, Carlos Santos, Michelle Larioque, and Kevin Carbonell. Maraming salamat po for staying with us. All right. Oh, yung kanina pa, paano ba yun? Yun nga, yung factor na yun na sa educational system natin. Ano, Doc Clem, ang tingin mong kailangan? Okay, give us, I'm sure there's a multitude of things that you think we should be addressing as far as the educational system is concerned. But to make it more responsive, make it more relevant, what are the top 3 things that you think we should do about the system, whether it's initiated by government or society itself?
Okay, but before I'd like to respond to your earlier point about the cases of really poor kids, even really succeeding and becoming congressmen or presidents or whatever. No? Of course, there are such cases, but the question would be: are those exceptions that disprove the rule, or are those exceptions that actually prove the rule?
Well, yeah.
Because for every kid that succeeds, every poor kid that succeeds in education, how many thousands actually do not? Okay, kaya sa akin, problematic itong sineselebrate natin pala, pero celebrate tayo ng mga isang bata na mahirap pero nag-succeed, and we go to town celebrating his achievements. I mean, I'm not saying we don't, but if we celebrate that achievement to the extent that it obscures the issue of inequality, I think there's a problem. Okay? Kasi sasabihin naman natin, sasabihin kasi, oo. Yeah, kasi sabihin nila, sabihin nila, hindi hadlang ang kahirapan. Hindi totoo yan eh. Hadlang talaga ang kahirapan, totoo lang. Okay. And until you learn to accept that, you will never get to address kahirapan in terms of its everyday manifestations. Now, going to your second question about what should government do, I don't know if I have I don't know if I have 3 things right now, but certainly I think government should invest heavily in basic education and in education in the early years. Okay, and the government should support families. Okay, support families not only in terms of resources, tulad ng mga pantawid pamilyang Pilipino program, yung cash transfers, I mean, those are important policy directions, but I think we need to develop institutions that support poor families. Preschools, we need to strengthen the barangay in terms of how it is able to for example, address educational needs, or support working parents and so on. It's crucial. The early years is very crucial. There's an interesting study in the sociology of education. This was done by a famous educational sociologist. His name is the name escapes me right now, actually. What do you call this? Bernstein. I'm sorry, Basil Bernstein. Okay, yeah, that's the name. And one of his students, one of his collaborators, was also, I think, his students. Did a study. They took kids. By the way, the study was done in the West. I think this was in either North America or England. They took 2 groups of kids. Okay, one coming from 7-year-olds. Okay, one group coming from working class families, and another group coming from middle class families, and they were given food stuff. All kinds, to classify any way they want. Okay, the kids from working class families used classifications like, this is what we always eat, this is what my brother likes to eat, This is what I always see in the store, stuff like that. Okay. Kids from middle-class families were using abstract concepts like dairy, like cereal, like meat. So it was an important what you call this? It was an important finding, because people realized that in fact even at a very early age, when kids enter the educational system, okay, the very moment when they set foot in the educational system, some kids are already advantaged. Some kids are already able to learn or use abstract concepts, whereas others, their way of making sense of the world is very context dependent. Okay, and that could be a result. I mean, the studies at least show that that is something that is probably shaped by their economic, their material conditions. Okay, one of my students actually validated that. No? Sabi niya, sir, meron ako isang estudyante na she's teaching math in high school. Meron ako isang estudyante na bagsak sa basic algebra, no? Hirap na hirap sa math. No? Pero napag-alaman ko, dahil sila ay mahirap lang, nagtitinda pala siya sa kalsada. Nagtitinda sa kalsada. At doon ko rin nakita na hindi naman talaga siya bobo sa math. Kaya ang bilis mag-compute. No? Napakabilis. Bumili ka ng yosi, ganito pera ng tao, magkano sukli? Mabilis.
Tsaka pagtongit.
But if you start, kahit gano'n, no? Pero pag tinanong mo siya about abstract quantities, parang meaningless sa kanya.
Iba na.
Parang meaningless. So what we're saying is that middle class kids are in fact better able to use abstract concepts. And guess what? Formal school knowledge is basically made up of these concepts. Okay? So doon pa lang, may advantage na eh. So what I'm saying is that kung mag-invest lang din ng gobyerno, dapat doon sa early years. No? So that you try your best. You cannot solve the inequality, all of it, but you can try to make the world a less unequal place at that level. Okay? So I think that's going to eventually improve things. No? And of course, you have to sustain the investment. No? So
all right.
So that's how I look at it. No? I don't really have three things, but maybe the other thing that I'd like to mention is that we need to seriously decentralize education in this country.
Yeah, decentralize.
Yes, decentralized
so
education.
Budget, basic education, decentralization. Ang ganda. And Boris, I think we're that's all the time we have for today.
It's medyo bitin. And enthralled pa ako listening to how the way you think, basically. And the way you think just challenges. And I wish DepEd and the government are listening to this to not just look at the system, but look at the problem, that it could be the root cause for a systemic problem altogether. When we look at that, we design the way we approach our education system altogether. So thank you so much, Dr. Clem. Napaka-insightful po ng hapon namin ngayon, is because you tinkered with our minds and you shared with us with your thoughts and some of the things that you've been sharing, I'm sure, with your students and your coaches here in Visayas.
Salamat din, no? Salamat din. Madamo masalamat, no? For the opportunity, to share. Sa ulitin. Feel free to invite me if you think I can contribute to your discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
All right.
Dr.
Thank you.
Camposano from UP Visayas, Iloilo. All right. And Boris, it's time to say goodbye, I guess. And I certainly hope our friends out there have found this very meaningful. Icar said support families and the teachers too. Yes, we said that. Teachers need to be enabled as well, of course. Pero kailangan din talaga yung focus nga kung saan tayo kailangan focus. I don't know. Well, Boris, akin, one thing that comes to mind that really bore a mark with what Doc Clem was discussing, sabi nga, just as important or even more important than the knowledge and the knowledge and the wisdom and the skills that are learned, yung sense of purpose ng ating mga kabataan as they go along our education. Kanina umaga lang napanood ko yung YouTube interview talk ni Jack Ma. Si Jack Ma ng Alibaba. And sabi nga niya, it's more than IQ, more than EQ. Sabi niya, what's important to me is LQ. Sabi niya, LQ, hindi naman lovers quarrel. So intelligence, emotional quotient, and love quotient, our ability to love, and out of that love, to use whatever we have in the service of others. Others who are not necessarily related to you. Sabi ka, ano ba yung term ni Doc Clem kanina? Yung parang some other people who are not directly connected to you. That's what education is all about. That's what I picked up. Boris?
I agree totally, and I think one of the major takeaway that I got is let's not heighten or amplify inequality as it is. Education should not do that. There's a lot of points that Dr. Clem mentioned a while ago that worsen the situation of inequality. Education should allow us to look at people as people. Everybody has the capability to be whatever they want to be, as long as they're hardworking and, like what you said, has the ability to care and show compassion. And ako, salamat. This is a good discussion altogether. Guys, thank you for joining us.
Great Friday.
See you again next Friday, and we promise new episodes that are relevant and educational for you all. God bless. Bye-bye.
Stay well.
Getting your message across in this highly digitized world is a challenge. You need numerous platforms and highly skilled workers to produce engaging and professional online events. This is why we live. We come alongside you and manage your back-end online event needs, so you can focus on what really matters. Your content. We're ready to amplify and get your message across.